This is Marty and Jaden versus books. We just finished reading The Way of Kings, and what a book.
What an avalanche, a Sanderlanche of experience.
Sanderlanche.
It was fantastic. It was easily one of the best books I've read in a long, long time. Or
Wow.
listened to in a long, long time. I would say, we're going to do a full review. I want to talk through what do you think about the plot. I want to talk about what do you think about the characters, the development. The fact that it's the beginning of an entire series means a lot to me personally. It's just phenomenal. I'm excited to talk through more about what you think, and I have some interesting ideas as to what I would rate this book, whether we would recommend this to somebody else. So let's dive straight into it.
Yeah, well, the book was fantastic, right? So I actually got into Sanderson starting with Mistborn first, and to this point in all the books I'd read of Sanderson, that series was my favorite books of all time.
The Mistborn series.
The series as a whole.
Yes.
It's hard to say any one of those books are my favorite books of all time, but having completed this book, I've now reread this book. I would say this tops the Mistborn series.
The entire series of Mistborn.
Entire series of Mistborn. Which, even as you say it that way, it kind of almost like, ooh, do I really want to say that because I love Mistborn? But this
Fair enough.
It's just a powerful book, right?
Yeah.
It's just got an amazing plot line, amazing story. It follows several different characters, which honestly is a little bit of a weakness for me too of this book. It's a weakness at the beginning, but it becomes a strength by the end. I have a hard time with character views switching over and over again because you have to restart a new story. Again.
That is one of my main complaints of The Way of Kings in general. And I know, again, I mentioned 30 seconds ago, this is one of my favorite books ever.
Yes.
But I do want to mention that it loses points in my mind because of the complexity of the world. And I think that inherently will give book review points to the series because it's fun to have that experience through so many different characters' eyes. But it loses points as its own book because it probably took hours of listening or reading to finally get to the point where you're like, I understand what the heck's going on. I know what a shard blade is. All of that stuff makes no sense for the first so many chapters. You almost feel like you have to reread. And that, I think, is one of the reasons, if they haven't seen this video, they might not even pick up the book to read it because it's just so hard to get into. It's really difficult unless someone's recommending it and pushing it to you. You recommended this book to me, right? I never would have read this if you hadn't said you have to read The Way of Kings. They're so great. It's worth it. It's worth the time. Get into it. Figure it out.
It's worth it.
Because a lot of people won't. They'll stop at that first 3 chapters of confusion.
Well, yeah, and I cross my fingers that anyone I'm giving this book to as a recommendation, that they won't get bored every single time it switches to a new character for the very first time.
Yeah.
Because I was saying, that is the hardest part for me in a book is just the beginning of a book, the intro. We're trying to get a new setting, new people. Who are these names? What's going on? But then as the book continues and as you were saying that all these crazy things are going on, what are shard blades? What are all these things? That's also one of the strengths of the books. I love how Sanderson introduces his concepts in the book. It's not a Lord of the Rings, I'm going to tell you about this mountain for 3 pages. It's, I'm going to scatter these pieces in throughout the book.
Yeah.
So it paints a picture while you're enjoying a story. Such a very, very cool way of doing things.
Definitely.
I love
definitely.
that.
So I would probably say that one of my favorite parts of this book overall is just the fact that it's not really pure entertainment. It's not one of those books that you just read and you're like, oh yeah, I got a few minutes to spare. I'll just read something to be reading something, to be entertained. While it's very entertaining, I think one of the things that I like the most about this book is that the entertainment level also becomes instructional, educational, valuable. You learn about leaders, you learn about kings, you learn about honor and trustworthiness and the pain of betrayal. Brandon Sanderson does a phenomenal job overall. I don't know if we do artist. You know what? I don't know if we do author ratings, but we probably will need to start because Brandon Sanderson as an author, I think, has many fantastic qualities that he puts into these books, especially the Stormlight Archive series, because of just the elements of real life, real politics, real confusion and frustrations, and just the reality of the hero of the book goes through 2 depression cycles like that. I'm telling you what, I know there's spoilers in this video, but that's something that is so real. It's so much more human, so much more emotional than you would typically see in a hero fantasy novel.
Sanderson is masterful at writing emotions into characters and making them so real. The response of this is a spoiler alert. This is your official spoiler alert.
There you go.
So Kaladin, even it comes down to him working with his bridge crews and telling them that, like, hey, I want to get our bridge crews together. We're going to have success and do all these things. And nobody cares.
Yep.
Like, and it's just so real. All of those moments and things are so real, how people respond. Nobody listens to Dalinar.
Yep.
And apparently all I'm saying is life's real when no one listens to you.
But it's tough. It's a challenge. You see those movies and you see the videos come out that are like, well, that's a convenient plot point, don't you think? Where just things just happen to work out so well that the plot can continue forward. I feel like this is, in a way, the opposite of that. Like, every time when something needs to work out, it's like the bridge crews and all those things where it's like, it just doesn't. Like, Kaladin should have already had a shard blade the whole time.
Yes.
He doesn't. It's just so frustrating.
Well, and I think that kind of ties to the other thing that I love about Sanderson. I have never seen an author or storyteller of any kind be able to write their characters into such a moment of despair. And
Yes.
it feels like in every single book, he gets these characters into books like, I don't know what they're going to do. They're screwed. There's literally no way out. And even if you see a way out, he's going to cut that way off for you and everything. I'm like, Sanderson, I don't know what you're going to do about this. And then he finds a way that not only is really good, but it makes a whole ton of sense.
Yes.
And you could have seen coming if you were rereading the book, especially.
And that's what gets you so deep into the plot. And that's, I think, a huge point for the plot of the book in general and the series is that you're so invested in it. You're like, you feel like you're in the shoes of each of the characters. You're trying to decide how they're going to escape these certain scenarios they've been put in. It doesn't feel like, a lot of the recent Hollywood action movies where you're just like, is this even entertainment value at this point? There's just no struggle. There's no challenge. There's no just difficulty. And I think that they go through so much of that in these books, and it feels so real. And like you said, it feels so hopeless. You're not like, well, I know what's going to happen next because it's pretty obvious.
Yep. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Brandon Sanderson is the Christopher Nolan of books. He is able to just write people who are so real and moments that are so grand and
just a master of his medium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he's just able, everything just builds up to a gigantic Sanderlanche at the end. And I feel like Christopher Nolan does the same thing in all of his movies. Yep. It feels, he makes the Batman. He's like, I'm not going to make just a superhero. He's going to live basically in New York, even though we're not going to call it New York. We're going to call it Chicago. Same thing, Chicago. Either one of those cities, he just makes it completely real. And that's what Sanderson does in his books. He's like, it's a fake story, but you're going to feel like this could actually have happened.
Absolutely. So I think that brings us to, what is your rating for Brandon Sanderson, Way of Kings?
I do ratings on a scale from 1 to 10. I'm
That's
not
fair.
a big fan.
Yep.
And I will do decimal points too. I'm not a fan of the Goodreads, no decimal points, 5-star rating. There's a big difference between a 3-star rating and a 4-star rating.
Okay, stars in general, I have a problem with because everyone assumes that 5 stars is like what's supposed to be average. Like, they just met the expectation, so it's 5 stars. That's
Out of
not
10,
how
you're
it
saying.
works. No, in general, like you take an Uber and they're like, "Oh, just give me 5 stars because I got you from point A to point B." Like that. 5 stars has really been ruined by our society. So we have to do a scale of 10. That's the only way to do this properly.
Yes, of course. So for me, well, I gave the rating first last time, so you get
Fair enough. Fair enough. If you haven't seen that video, don't forget to check it out.
Shadows for Silence. That was
I would say that I would give Way of Kings a 9.6.
Ooh, you are going hard into those decimals.
Yes.
Wow.
It was going to be a 9.5, but just I looked at the cover and just brought it up to a 9.6.
Actually, side story here. I was actually looking at this cover the other day, and I'm like, I think this cover makes the book even better. Like,
it potentially could.
Can you imagine picking up this book and it had like some crappy cover on front of it? Like, it would just take down the tone of the whole book. Like, this thing's amazing. Like,
They did a
Howard
good
Lyon's
job.
incredible. But I would give this book a 10. This is a 10 for me.
No one is surprised by that rating. He has said before in other episodes of our podcast series of this that it was the best book ever written. So I can understand.
Yes.
It has to be a 10.
Yeah, I think it's the best fiction book ever written. But
That's fair.
Yes,
That's fair.
Yes. But I think it's fantastic. I think that all of the elements come together very, very well. I enjoy pretty much like the whole story. I'm just enthralled by.
Yep.
And it's great.
I do want to mention why it's not a 10.
Yeah.
for
Why
me.
is it? Why are we missing?
So point
4/10.
4/10. Yes. 4/10 of the score was lost simply because And I will preface this by saying Brandon Sanderson is a master of the medium, and there is no way that he could have written this book better. I don't want to say that.
So is a 9.6 a 10 in your head?
The 9.6
just should the scale be out of 9.6?
Yeah. No, I think it's a 9.6 for me because of personal taste, and that's why I want to specifically mention like he could not have written
fantasy
it better.
Books.
I do think the confusing element of it. This is my second read. Probably would have bumped it to a 9.8, but I think overall the book for me is a 9.6 because it took me a really long time to get into it, like hours and hours, which I like a book that can just wrap me into it from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, the switching between characters, there are moments in the book where I have like an audible groan when I'm really getting into a Kaladin fight, and then it just switches scenes, and I'm like, oh, that hurts.
Yeah.
I know it was done intentionally, and I don't want to slight the creativity that goes into it. Fantastic. I'm just saying from a personal reading perspective, it has to be.
And so did I catch this right? So you said that if this was the first time you were reading it probably would have been a 9.8, but now since it's the second time, it's a 9.6?
The second time would have been a 9.8 if I can include 2 readings because I know all the characters now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, and since you've read it twice now, it's bumped up to a 9.8 then. Put you on the spot, and now you're backing off.
My initial reaction would be a 9.6.
Yeah.
So I don't know. If I was to just say rating this book on a scale that I know is a scale that is intended to either recommend or not recommend books to a new reader, I'm going to keep it as a 9.6.
Okay. Would you recommend at what number would you recommend a book over?
I'd recommend anything over 8.
Over 8?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. So definitely recommend the book.
Some 7.5s depending on the person.
Okay, depending on the person. If you don't like them that much, you get 7.
If they've read a ton of books and they're looking for the next thing and they've already read all my high recommendations, I would potentially recommend a 7.5. Maybe it's just my own personal
I'll take
preference. But 9.6, The Way of Kings,
so
which gives us
a final rating of 9.8. I see what you did there.
I'm just that sneaky.
Yeah, you just wanted a 9.8 on this.
So we rate a 9.8 is phenomenal.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't really see many other books getting that high.
I highly doubt we're going to see a book cross the 9.8 threshold. That's the number 1 book we've ever reviewed across our whole channel.
Yeah, huge.
I know.
And we've been up for a long time, too.
Yeah, if you check out the channel page, you'll know that we've been doing this for a very long time. So we know what we're talking about.
Time.
But I do want to say, if you are interested in reading The Way of Kings, please do so. It's a high recommend book. And if you do read it, we have a series on our channel and in our podcast that walks through it in 4 parts. So if you want to read the book, every part that you read, you can then watch our reactions to it and see what we think about it and kind of follow us along the way.
Yeah, in those series, you get more of all of this that we just had, this conversation.
More of the goodness.
But just longer, deeper, in podcast format as we are preparing. We're preparing for the release of Book 5 of The Way of Kings.
We're so excited.
So stoked for it. So anyways, if you haven't read The Way of Kings and you ignored my spoiler warning, still read the book. I loved it the second time too.
Absolutely.
It was fantastic. I would recommend this book to anyone. Maybe if you have not read anything Sanderson first, start with Mistborn first.
That is the only slight nuance that I would agree with that, but don't feel afraid to start with this book. Like if you're planning on
start with it over Mistborn?
I think you can. I think if you're motivated to get into it and you've watched this video, so you know it's a little difficult for the first few chapters, I think you can be absolutely successful and love every minute of this book.
You know what? I would agree with that.
So go for it. If you're planning on reading this, let us know in the comment section below. If you've already read it, let us know what your actual rating of this book would be. We're definitely curious to average out the commenters' views as well, and I think that will go into our final rating. We'll have our rating. Will also have an average of the commenters' ratings. So rate it out of 10. Leave that in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we do this every single week and we love it. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Can't wait to hear your thoughts.